His House from 2020, a refugee couple makes a harrowing escape from war-torn South Sudan, but then they struggle to adjust to their new life in an English town that has an evil lurking beneath the surface. This is directed by Remi Weeks.
Yes. Yeah, so right out the gate, this film is a phenomenal piece of social horror.
For sure,
that I feel like really encompasses the empathetic power of this genre of being able to put people into the shoes. Like, how else would you show to an audience the PTSD and trauma that an immigrant experiences, and also like that struggle with, keeping yourself, who you are fundamentally, and also reworking that image to fit into the narrative that they need from you. And so I find that like one of the best parts of this film is that we can find fear in like, the spooks that are happening on screen, the monsters that are hiding in the shadows, but also the monsters that we find within ourselves and in those struggles. And it's like that internal battle. It does make me think of like, and we'll discuss the ending at the end of this episode. So it's relative, like no big spoilers until the end, and we'll give you a big warning beforehand. But I feel like this whole story tells us like a reimagining of the telltale heart, in that our choices ultimately haunt us, right? And we wonder, did we do the right thing? And if we didn't, why did we do that thing? And so I feel like Weeks was seeking to tell the story of the immigrant experience, obviously, and specifically the immigrant experience that is wrought with tragedy, impermanence, and loss. Because it's a very complex issue of figuring out where you're from, where you're going. That's kind of like the... this film was the first in a long time that I was actually genuinely afraid of. There were... it has like the whispers and creatures in the darkness and fast inhuman footsteps that always get Kat and myself. And I'd even say like creatures that are, Del Toro like in their creation of like
they were scary.
And even more frightening, I think, is that battle of morality too, which is like what we strive for and love in horror. The film does try to tackle a lot of things, and usually in my experience that is a setup for failure. Usually it's like, oh, you're trying to juggle too much, so you're gonna let one fail, like we always say, like, don't
drop the ball kind of deal,
whole butt one thing.
Whole butt.
But because all the things that Weeks is trying to accomplish are naturally intertwined with one another, they are results of each other, they are naturally like ingrained, it doesn't miss a beat. They all work. Like, I don't think there's not a single thing I could complain about with this film, honestly. Like, not a thing. And I find in the story a yearning to belong, to start anew, and also that grappling of our identity and a reconciliation with the things that we do out of desperation. Which is like the pivotal point of this film. We are first introduced to these characters when they are traveling by boat to Britain, which Kat talked about as, being one of the main forms of transportation. And it is like utter chaos. They are taking on water. It is harrowing and scary just in that little journey. And we haven't even seen a monster. And when you're watching this, like, as a viewer myself, I couldn't help but ask, like, why? Like, what happened back there that they are willing to risk their lives on this rickety boat, like, in, terrifying waters that are coming, like, clearly in danger, like, something brought them to this point. And after, going over things like Tigers Are Not Afraid, it's like, obviously something was happening back there. But even still, like, I don't need to know the specifics. I just knew something awful had to have happened for them to be here and to want it so bad. And so, like, I think there was it's kind of interesting to have that not direct like answer. Like we didn't see before that. Like you don't get the answers until
Yeah,
much
you don't
later.
get it till later. Uh-huh.
And even still, you're like, I get it. I can buy that. Like I totally understand, because it comes like in small, like little trickling tidbits throughout. Like we get little hints or we get stories from the characters, and then it comes into a big crashing wave at the end that you realize like what directly brought them here, what their journey was right before they got here. But you never doubt for like a moment that something awful happened and that is why they're here. Because why else would they fight so hard in this like decrepit home to make it theirs, while they're surrounded by strangers who don't want them there?
Yeah, and I think it was this very real portrayal of how trauma is processed. And you even have like this, because Rial's character, she's still very much like missing Sudan. Like even with the trauma, she's kind of like willing to go back, even though he's not. Like she's kind of has this very like dissociated view of like how it was beforehand, and that's something that's really real in how people process trauma. Is you can't process it till you stop running. Like if you're running from a beast, you're not going to be focused on the beast so much until you've finished running and you take a pause and a deep breath. So like
adrenaline.
Yeah, you kind of have this like, as you said, like slow trickle into them processing finally what actually happened. And this very like real like kind of denial at first, and then like slow acceptance of like how awful things kind of were in the journey, and then also the before. The like going back unfortunately isn't an option, but it like took a long time to kind of accept that and get over that, because when you're not there anymore, you kind of have this like nostalgia, or maybe like misremembering, because trauma is kind of the way it solidifies in the brain. It messes with how you process your memories.
Yeah, and
so
I mean,
just thought that was done really beautifully.
Yeah, you probably also like compartmentalize like the horrific parts and hold on to the parts that were the everyday and the parts that you loved about it, because that's your home. That's, you know, it wasn't all bad. Like that's not how that works. And so you kind of hold on to that, and also like romanticize because of where you are now. And actually, so in an article on Collider that I found called His House Director's Ending Explanation Finds Hope in the Haunting by Perry Nemiroff, director Remi Weeks discusses his intention to include the creeping and tantalizing fear trauma can leave you with. So very exactly like what you were saying, Kat. He says, yeah, and part of the story was the dangers of ignoring it, that you can try and ignore trauma, but the more you ignore it, the more it gets to you. It's more of the emotional, invisible pain of mental illness, which is what I guess the creature more represented. Because I think the PTSD representation in this film was really gut-wrenching. Like in the beginning, when he is having that panic attack, and you are first kind of getting hints of a supernatural element, like you reason as a viewer that this is just a personification of him going through this trauma and the stress that he is under of like trying to, you know, put on airs and exist in this world and forget what brought them here. And he's having that like whole attack, and you really empathize with Bull. And like long before you even understand what caused this distress, like and why he's being haunted, you are like, something is up. He is not okay, and it's scary and it's heartbreaking. And it really is enough to realize that he is honestly in pain and kind of grasping with reality, and he's losing, honestly.
It was interesting too, like that we were able to root for him too. Like I feel like we don't have that in movies like, was it The Shining that he goes crazy?
Yeah, Shining arguably goes crazy. I would say he was always crazy.
Yeah, but I guess like you have that whole like the whole idea, you're like, his house, oh God, he's gonna be doing something, like, oh no. But like you really sympathize with him, which I feel like I haven't felt in other films as much, where like this guy goes like nuts, and like is like really like, you don't have this like empathy, I guess, as much. At least I didn't, for other characters that I did have for him. I thought that was really well done. Yeah,
absolutely. And yeah, the comparison to The Shining of like because they are isolated. Even the fact that they can go outside, they like, what is outside for them? It's just an an extension of their prison, you know? And so it does have that kind of what isolation can do when you're left alone with your thoughts.
Yeah.
There's a lot of amazing things in this film, which like we do not have the time to go into all of them, but I'll try my best to pick out all of my favorite parts. One of the things I really enjoyed was the use of South Sudanese mythology and religion as like grounding these characters and kind of fleshing out what the horrors were, because we don't really get to see that. But there's also like this strength in their understanding, and how like those horrors are actually nothing in comparison to the real things that they're suffering from. Rial's story about the Apeth, which is like the Night Witch, is essentially about how a good man wanted more and then ended up stealing, and then is haunted by this Apeth because he stole from them. And it brings about, you know, his own demise. And in any other horror film, if we had a story in the middle of it that was like, let me tell you exactly what this film is, you know, we would be like, oh, good, you're just on the nose, you're telling us what it is. But this really, I felt, was a genuine story that didn't feel like it took away from it. It only added to what I was expecting and what I needed from it. And I think her emphasis on saying like this was a good man who had to resort to stealing, and it's never like she never says he became a bad man. It was like, this is a good man who resorted to stealing and then he had to pay it
back.
And so you think while you're watching this, because she's very clearly saying this to Bull for a reason, and you're like, well, then what did this good man do? And why are they being haunted by this Apeth? And it's like, it's transformative for that. Because again, you're really feeling for Bull up until that moment. And then you're like, well, what happened? What's going on here? I found a real strength in Rial, who's played by Wunmi Mosaku from Lovecraft Country. She plays Ruby. And I loved her because she was not frightened by the ghosts or the Apeth Witch. And that was really interesting to have a character who does that, like, and to say it was kind of like what I was hoping from in Vampires versus the Bronx when she was like, I'm Haitian, I'm not afraid of vampires. I was hoping that strength would come through there, and like the fact that like like this culture has an understanding of the blending of worlds, and so there's like, we're not going to get spooked by a little bump in the night, right? And she explains like quite candidly that after everything that she's experienced, there is no way that specters are going to frighten her. She's like, you think I'm going to be afraid of this Night Witch? There's no way. And I haven't seen a character like Rial in horror in a long time, and I honestly can't even recall another character quite like her.
I would agree,
because she was really strong, but she was also vulnerable, because like you saw that her strength was like, she's got to hold up a lot, and she is fighting back in her own battles while also trying to support and be this partner and also like hold him accountable, and not even knowing what she's holding him accountable for, because she's also repressing memories, right? I think one of the truly unsettling scenes with her is when she's lost in the cement labyrinth of this new neighborhood and like comes to, you know, these 3 young Black teenagers who are incredibly xenophobic. Like, even though she's Black, they're like, go back to Africa. Like, we hear our beloved attack the block accents from these youths, and they're so mean, and you're like, no. Trust, bruv.
I know.
And it was so heartbreaking. And I feel like that was a scene that got to me. Also later when she's like confronting her memories, which are very real. Those are really real events that happen to her. And that's scary. Like, those are scary things. Way more than like the creeping in the house. Like, I was like, this is terrifying. And she is really holding it together. And I feel like she was, you know, untouchable by any of the traditional haunts and horrors because of all that she's been through, and like, you know, was super powerful in that. Also, like you mentioned, Kat, her explaining the scarifying technique of having both representations of the tribes was her way of showing that she knows what it takes to survive, and that she will do whatever it takes to conform and exist and not be persecuted, which even means, leaving your home and stripping away your most personal allegiances, and just to blend in and be safe. So already, like, we've seen it. Like, we've seen someone have to do it. No wonder she's going to understand that people do whatever it takes. Later, we see Bol, who's played by Sope Dirisu, do something similar when he burns their clothes and, like, all their belongings from Africa. And Rial is, like, upset. She even says, like, this is the only thing I have from my father. They burn the only item they have of their daughter, Nyagak. And it's like, whoa, he is, like, actively like, no, this is our past. We have to fit in. We have to just get rid of that. And we see him later in the department store looking at the advertisement of this white family. And in the end, he buys those items. That's how much he wants to fit in. And that actually reminded me of Jordan Peele's Us with Winston Duke's Gabe, and how he, like, bought a boat and he wore, like, these clothes and he had these, like, mannerisms because he was trying to replicate what he understood as wealth, and it just happened to be, like, white people wealth, right? Like, he was just, like, playing this role and trying to fit in and trying to feel like he belongs there. And I would be remiss to not mention the amazing, stunning imagery and cinematography of this film, which was just like I was in awe the whole time. Not just of, like, the spooks, but also just the practical effects were really amazing, and added to that sense of dread and performance, even in that, like, bridge between what is real and what is, like, our trauma, kind of, like, seeping into what we're experiencing, which is kind of like Babadook. Like, in one of the scenes that will remain rent-free in my brain forever is where Bol is at the kitchen table and he's, like, angrily stabbing at his dinner with his knife and fork, which he's still getting used to using. And we're, like, slowly panning out, and you see, like, cracks in the foundation and everything that he has been slowly kind of, like, hitting at anyway, but we see the sky, or we see smoke, and we're like, what, has it always been that way? And as it slowly keeps coming back, you realize, like, no, we're not even in the house anymore. This is just, his house has been cut out, and it's now this, like, makeshift ship, and he's in the middle of the ocean in this dream sequence, covered in, like, dust, and, like, surrounded by orange fog and the waves that are crashing around him, and it's like, whoa. Like, what am I experiencing right now? And I thought that was so amazing, because it is like this, like, he is just in the situation, and it's so easy to, like, do dream sequences where they're really silly, especially in horror. And this was like, that's what trauma does. Like, you don't even know it's real. And it kind of, you're walking this line between realities as they're just, like, folding into each other in your, like, current anxiety. Throughout the film, I found things that stuck with me weren't really the creatures so much, although they were super scary. And, like, they were, like, intense, like Nyagak and her mask, and, like, them all coming in, like, these zombies from their journey, who didn't make it, and that guilt, that survivor's guilt that you can see personified there. Those were scary, but it was, I think, what was truly terrifying was how helpless it felt, as Bol is, like, spiraling out of control and losing his, like, mental stability. And there's, like, one of the most heartbreaking scenes is him in the social worker's office.
Oh my God, yeah.
And he's, like, broken down. He is dirty. They even, like, remark on him that he doesn't smell too good. And he is, like, at wit's end. Like, he is snapped, because he's at this point where he really is wrestling. Like, he knows why the ghosts are there, simultaneously is, like, denying why the ghosts are there, and he is asking for a different house because something is wrong with this one, and instead of compassion or understanding or an ounce of sympathy, he is met with, like, these snide remarks like, it's bigger than my house, or emphasis on how he needs to be one of the good ones, which is just, like, every time
such a cringe.
And in an article on IndieWire, called His House Review, Remi Weeke's thrilling debut, sees the immigrant experience as a horror movie by writer David Elrich. He agrees with me on this fact and says, Weeke's conceit works best when shining a light on the most vulnerable members of a society are those who can't risk asking for help. Bull is seduced by the promise of a new life, only to spiral into a Babadook-like battle against the trauma that followed him across the world. And I think there is a strength in battling our demons that's similar to what we saw in Babadook, in that it is a constant war. It's not like one battle that we fight and then we win. It's like, no, you have to learn to live with it. You have to learn to look it in the face and be like, no, we gotta coexist, because you're not going away, but I'm not going away either. And that's really shown in this film in a way that like we don't really see a lot in horror, where there's a sympathetic understanding of mental illness that is like persistent and not just like a one-off thing. Right? Like it's not a haunting like The Grudge where you leave the house. Like it's not that. It is like it's following you. And I think like, showing Bull ripping at this house and yelling in the face of the haunts and fighting back and not backing down was a refreshing portrayal of a crumbling protagonist. And even when he is falling apart, there's like a strength when he finally does kind of give in to this, and he accepts and acknowledges his own flaws and sins of the past that were brought in by desperation. Like he's like, I'm sorry, this is what happened. And like you said, in the end, can we blame him? Yeah, we totally understand what brought him here. We can't even be mad. Like, I mean, we're mad, but we're like, I'm more mad that life put you there, that life gave you that as your only option at the end of it. And I think that is the beauty of this film and the genre as a whole, like what potentially it could do. And it's that, we can have truly terrifying monsters as stand-ins for the monsters who are in our minds. And that we can watch a character that looks that monster in the eye and accepts their fate and fights back.
Yeah. This film should win awards. I don't know if it has. It should if it hasn't. And both actors 100% need to win awards, because there was like this really powerful, the way Bull's like eyes were whenever he smiled, you could see the like visceral pain that he was experiencing. He's trying so hard to just present himself as okay. And you mentioned the scene where he breaks the cup in his hand while
when he's laughing.
Yeah, they need awards. They all need awards because were so powerful in their acting. Like it was so visceral and like authentic in terms of just like the emotion being portrayed, and you could see the pain in their eyes, and it was just like fantastic. Like you believed everything that was happening. You're like, I am terrified, both because monsters, and also just because this feels so like empathy kick in, like you're watching this and really like feeling for the people in the film, which is everyone should win awards.
And I mean, you bring up a good point, because horror is notably overlooked for awards and isn't treated at all seriously. Like we have had outstanding performances by actors in the horror world, when we're even just thinking about Hereditary and with Toni Collette, or Us with Lupita Nyong'o, or even people giving props to, and I agree because I think she did a great job, Elizabeth Moss in Invisible Man. And I think that these two in this film, like, unfortunately, horror does not get its due diligence. Like people don't pay attention to it. It's discredited because of like slashers and such, for not understanding how important and necessary telling these stories are, and so hopefully we can look at a future where that changes and they do take horror seriously, because I agree that this is like
I think it will.
Acting.
I think it will, because I think our previous generations have been really focused on those rose-colored lenses for processing their own issues / forcing that kind of view on other people. Like everything is okay dance has always been very pronounced. Where I feel like now we're starting to really look at things and like be honest about them, and mental health acknowledgments have gone up. I think this is the time for horror because of like people finally kind of acknowledging it and looking it in its eyes for what it is. Not everybody, but we're seeing more of it, where people are waking up, I guess, to the reality of things. Yeah. So I think if anything, if it was ever going to get recognition in terms of people being like, yeah, horror, I think we're getting there. We're approaching that lens.
Yeah, I mean, it's enough, I think, even just that this was a project that was greenlit and taken seriously, and that Remi was able to create it, right? Like that he was given the opportunity that, you know, maybe just a few years ago, honestly, a handful, he might not have. And that's what we see a lot. Like, we're slowly starting to see those stories that people have been like banging on the door, like, hey, let us in. We have this story to tell. And so many people being like, oh, we want
that
more
sounds
white people
sad to know.
Yeah. Where's Freddie and Jason? No. Instead,
it's like the doctor, when she was talking about her daughter, she's honest about what happened to her daughter. She's like, wow. Okay.
Like, I don't know how to react to that.
Exactly.
Instead of just like, all I'm asking is for you to listen. Absolutely. Kat, did you want to talk about the ending, or do we feel like we've kind of told the story enough that people can just watch it and see the ending for themselves?
I think people should watch it for themselves, honestly. Because I think the reveal means something. Like, you know, it really adds to it, and it kind of like ties the masterpiece into a bow at the end. And I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it, which is rare because usually I just say things by accident all the time.
Well,
self-control.
And I agree that it's like, you really, to get the full journey, like emotionally, you need to be asking yourself, what is it? What's going on? What's happening? And I would rather you find out through the characters than us. And so definitely watch this film. Highly recommend. It is on Netflix, which is like, oh, we left Shudder for a minute. But phenomenal film. And, you know, I give props to Netflix for housing it. And I really hope to see more. For our ratings, as we're kind of wrapping up, maybe we could say that if you like it, it's fighting your demons.
That's real. I thought of a ridiculous one that we do not have to use, but it made me laugh in my brain. Where if you didn't like it, it's like his house because he's isolated by himself. And if you did like it, it's our house.
Ridiculous. No, I want it to be our house.
No, I know. That's real. I'm just saying it was really funny in my brain. And I wanted to say it, but I like yours better.
And if you don't like it,
be one of the good ones. Be if you don't like it. Ugh.
Okay. So Kat, for your tragic tale in the facts section about how immigration works from South Sudan to the UK.
Oh, it's big gross. Like, I get, like, we should help. Like, asylum should not be. It's just people just need to acknowledge that the world doesn't belong to them, and this like sense of entitlement and privilege that comes, I guess, with being white, which is what all the gross cringe characters were.
All the white characters that you see, the creepy, you know, lady next door. But also, I mean,
was she doing?
The little
Stop
black boys
him.
too, though. You know, it was like everyone who had a British accent. We were like, ugh.
I mean, they were. Oh, I guess they're not their original colonizers because other people colonized too. But they're like one of the big ones. So they did it before it was cool.
Oh, gross.
Yeah, super gross.
No, they did it when people thought it was cool.
Yeah.
Agreed. I agree that.
Bad.
Yeah, that that the way that it works for asylum seekers is disgusting, and we need to fix that because no human is illegal, and people should be able to leave, especially when, you know, your country is probably, you know, a part of why their country is unstable.
And I apologize for laughing. I just do that when I'm nervous or uncomfortable.
Oh, no.
So I'm like, whenever anything's sad, I'm like, can't process emotion. Must laugh.
Yeah.
So
No. Totally
it's
real.
not funny. Genuine. Like, it's not funny. It's sad.
Yeah.
And shouldn't be how it is.
Yes.
So.
What about for the film?
Oh my God, it was a masterpiece. It should have all the awards. I was, as you say, it was the first time I had been scared in a minute too. Like, genuinely, like, by everything. Like, the whole thing was just like such a beautiful depiction of horror.
Yeah.
In like every sense. And I did do a little research on the Apeth and like Sudanese, I guess, tradition or like folklore is that what would be considered? Okay. So it seems like they might have been accurate. I read something on Screen Rant, but I didn't want to give my entire facts section to that because I felt like it would make more sense to talk about like the sad things.
Yeah. But it's also nice to have that.
Education, the more you know. But it seemed like it was like really well done, really respectful to like the culture it was pulling from, really authentic to the experiences that actually do happen to people, and just like anything. Ruby's in, I forget her real name, but
Winnie.
Yes, fantastic. Like, she's great. So
Absolutely.
It was absolutely astounding. Like,
yeah.
I think this series, I like had gone into a lot of films like not doing research beforehand because I just want to watch it and see. I didn't want to like form opinions before it happened, and I've been so like happy outside of Vampires versus the Bronx.
Yeah,
it's been really great, and this film needs to win stuff, and I don't know how to make that happen, but if there are ways,
it's not fully in our hands. But yeah, I agree. Should have got way more. Like, I didn't see it on nearly enough top 10 horror lists last year. I did not see it on enough lists, which is so sad. But yeah, I hope people watch it. I hope people watch our series. If, you know, this is the first one you're watching, check out the other ones because they're equally heartbreaking and also inspiring. Remember to like, subscribe, review, leave us a comment, please, on iTunes. That means a lot to us and is a way of supporting
our nourishment. It means I can do this as a job.
Yeah. So we can keep doing this that we love. So please do so. And yeah, definitely watch this film. And we have 2 other films in this series before we're wrapping it up to go and take a mental break and do something a little more fun, still spooky, but a little more fun, and have some guests involved. So, you know, just, check them out. And I hope you're enjoying this kind of sad but inspiring journey with us.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's like, especially in a lot of our films have been talking about trauma. And I think there's something really healing about acknowledging and like facing trauma. So hopefully it makes people feel like validated or just like, cool, someone's talking about this.
Yeah.
Because it should be being talked about. We're not just like happy fun times. But yeah.
Well, with that being said, don't get married. Delete your kids.
Or, I don't even want to make it.
Yeah, I don't want to make it. I don't want to say what happens. It's too sad. So instead,
I almost did it though.
I did too. I
almost did it.
I mean, we've said some pretty damnable things because we're horror fans, but it's gonna be. But
don't
yes,
get married, delete your kids.
Please enjoy
Yes.
and have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.